close your eyes and imagine yourself lying beneath an endless canopy of stars, far from the glow of modern cities, where the night sky stretches infinite and untouched above you. Picture the ancient world thousands of years ago, when our ancestors would gather around dying embers of their fires and gaze upward into that vast darkness, searching for meaning in the scattered points of light that pierced the cosmic veil. They saw more than random stars scattered across the heavens. They saw stories, gods, monsters, and warnings written in celestial fire. These early stargazers, from the hills of ancient Greece to the temples of Babylon, from the pyramids of Egypt to the observatories of China, all shared the same human need to find patterns in chaos, to weave narratives from the seemingly random dance of celestial bodies. They drew invisible lines between stars, creating shapes that would comfort them through long, dark nights, animals, heroes, gods, and goddesses that would watch over them from their eternal perches in the sky. What they created became our zodiac, those 12 familiar constellations that supposedly guide our personalities, our futures, our very souls. We know them today as gentle symbols: the brave ram, the steadfast bull, the playful twins, the nurturing crab. We read about them in horoscopes, see them on jewelry, use them to explain our quirks and desires. They seem so innocent, so comforting in their predictable wheel through the seasons. But tonight, as you drift deeper into this ancient realm of stars and stories, you will discover that these constellations carry much darker origins than the gentle personality guides we know today. Each zodiac sign springs from myths steeped in blood, betrayal, divine punishment, and human suffering. The stars that twinkle so peacefully above us are monuments to abduction, sacrifice, vengeance, and desperate escapes from monstrous fates. The ram that represents courage, born from a desperate rescue that ended in death. The bull of strength and stability, a disguise worn by a god to commit an act of divine violation. The twins of communication and duality, brothers torn between mortality and immortality, forever trapped in a compromise with death itself. So settle deeper into your comfortable space, let your breathing slow and your mind drift as we journey together through these ancient tales. Let the familiar become strange, the comforting become complex, as we uncover the beautiful lies and haunting truths written in starlight above our heads. Tonight, the zodiac will reveal its true face, not as gentle guide, but as eternal witness to the darkest aspects of divine will and human nature. The stars have been waiting to tell you their real stories, the ones that have been softened and sanitized over millennia. Are you ready to listen to what they whisper in the darkness, under the stars? A soft invitation to the zodiac. In the beginning, there was only darkness and the eternal dance of lights across the cosmic dome. Long before cities cast their artificial glow into the night, before streetlights stole the stars from our view, humans looked up and saw not emptiness, but a vast library written in fire. Each point of light was a letter, each constellation a chapter in the greatest story ever told, the story of how chaos became order, how fear became wonder, how mortal flesh learned to dream of immortality. Picture those first astronomers, their faces turned skyward in the cool desert air, their eyes reflecting the ancient light that had traveled across impossible distances to reach them. They were not unlike you, seeking comfort in the darkness, looking for patterns that might explain the inexplicable mysteries of existence. But what they found among the stars was not the gentle guidance we imagine today. It was a tapestry woven from threads of divine wrath, tragic love, desperate flight, and cosmic justice. The zodiac emerged from their observations like a slow revelation, 12 windows into the character of the gods themselves. Each constellation tells a story that our ancestors needed to remember. Cautionary tales dressed in starlight, warnings and promises that would guide them through the turning of seasons and the passage of years. These were not abstract symbols, but living narratives, as real to them as the ground beneath their feet and the air in their lungs. As you lie here in the quiet darkness, imagine yourself as one of those ancient watchers, feeling the cool night air against your skin, hearing the distant sounds of sleeping animals and rustling leaves. The stars above you are the same ones they watched, carrying the same stories, whispering the same secrets. Time collapses, and you become part of that eternal audience, ready to receive the wisdom and warnings written in celestial fire. But be prepared, for as beautiful as these star stories are, they spring from sources much darker than the gentle personality guides we know today. The ram that leads our zodiacal procession. Its fleece was golden because it was blessed by the gods to carry children away from a murderous sacrifice, only to demand one of its own. The bull that follows, symbol of earthly strength and sensual pleasure. It was the disguise chosen by the king of gods to perpetrate an act that would be called by its true name in any mortal court. Each sign of the zodiac carries within it this duality, the beautiful image we see projected in stars, and the shadow story that gave it birth. Tonight, as we drift together through these ancient tales, you will discover that our familiar constellations are monuments to some of the most disturbing episodes in mythological history. Yet, somehow, this makes them more beautiful, not less, for they remind us that even the darkest experiences can be transformed into light, that even divine cruelty can become a source of guidance and wonder. The wise ancients who first traced these patterns understood something we have forgotten in our age of electric lights and digital screens. They knew that comfort and terror are twin siblings, that beauty and horror dance together in the cosmic ballet, that the very stars that guide us are often born from acts of desperation, violence, and divine caprice. So, as we begin this journey through the zodiacal wheel, let yourself sink deeper into the darkness. Let your modern skepticism fade away, and allow yourself to become like those ancient stargazers, open to wonder, ready for truth, prepared to find meaning in the marriage of light and shadow that plays out above us every night. The stars are waiting to tell their real stories, the ones that have been whispered from constellation for thousands of years, the ones that reveal the zodiac not as a simple personality guide, but as humanity's oldest collection of dark fairy tales written in light across the infinite darkness of space. The first story begins with the sound of desperate hooves against stone, the flutter of golden wings, and a mother's terrible choice between her children and her own survival. Aries, the ram of sacrifice and flight, among all the creatures that populate our night. Sky Nun begins the celestial year with more apparent courage than the golden ram of Aries, its starlight horns pointed forward, as if charging into battle, its ethereal fleece glowing with the promise of leadership and bold action. We see in Aries the pioneer, the one who breaks new ground, who faces challenges head-on with the confidence of a natural-born leader. But the true story of this celestial ram begins not with courage, but with terror, the most primal terror a parent can know. In the ancient kingdom of Orchomenus, there lived a king named Athamas, whose second wife, Ino, harbored a hatred so deep for her stepchildren that it poisoned the very air of the palace. Phrixus and Hel, the children of Athamas and his first wife Nephele, were beautiful and innocent, but their very existence served as daily reminders of a love that Ino could never claim as her own. So she devised a plan so cruel that it would make even the gods take notice, a plan that would rid her of these unwanted children forever, while appearing to be nothing more than religious devotion. Ino secretly sabotaged the kingdom's grain stores, allowing them to rot and spoil, ensuring that when planting season came, nothing would grow. Famine spread across the land like a plague, and the people cried out to their king for salvation. It was then that Ino played her master stroke. She bribed the messengers sent to consult the oracle at Delphi, instructing them to return with a fabricated prophecy. The gods demanded a sacrifice, they reported, their voices trembling with manufactured divine authority. Only by offering the king's eldest children to Zeus could the famine be ended and the kingdom saved. Imagine the weight that settled on Athamas's shoulders as he heard these words. The way his heart must have cracked like dried earth as he contemplated the impossible choice laid before him: save his children and watch his kingdom starve, or sacrifice the blood of his blood to appease divine wrath that was, in truth, nothing more than a stepmother's jealous rage. The king was trapped in a web spun from lies and manipulation, forced to raise the ritual knife against his own flesh. But the children's true mother, Nephele, was more than mortal. She was a cloud nymph, created by Zeus himself, and she watched from her ethereal realm as her babies were led toward the sacrificial altar. Her anguish echoed across the heavens like thunder, and from the depths of her despair arose a creature of such magnificent beauty that mortals would speak of it for millennia. To Kumaram, whose fleece caught and held the light of the sun itself, whose wings could carry precious cargo beyond the reach of earthly harm. The golden ram descended like a divine intervention, its hooves touching the earth just as the priest raised his blade above the trembling children. "Climb upon my back," the ram commanded, its voice carrying the authority of the gods themselves, "and I will carry you far from this place of death and lies." Phrixus and Hel, their hearts hammering with terror and hope, grasped the magical fleece and felt themselves lifted into the sky, away from the altar, away from their father's anguished face, away from the stepmother whose hatred had nearly consumed them. But divine rescue comes with its own price, and the ram's flight was not the gentle journey one might imagine. The wind at such heights was fierce and cold, cutting through their thin garments like knives of ice, while below them the earth fell away into a dizzy patchwork of fields and forests that seemed to spin with their own terror. Hel, the younger of the two, felt her small fingers beginning to slip from the golden fleece, her grip weakening as exhaustion and fear overwhelmed her childish strength. "Hold on," Phrixus cried, reaching for his sister, but the ram's flight was too swift, the winds too strong. Before his eyes, Hel's grip failed, and she plummeted toward the waters far below, her scream lost in the roar of wind and wings. The strait where she fell would forever bear her name, the Hellespont, but such geographical remembrance provided cold comfort to a brother who watched his sister die even as they fled from death itself. The ram carried its surviving burden to Colchis, far at the edge of the known world, where King Ates welcomed the divine refugee with wonder and respect. But even in safety, the price of salvation was not yet fully paid. The golden ram, having fulfilled its divine mission, spoke once more to the boy it had saved. My fleece must now serve a greater purpose. Take it, that it might become a treasure worthy of heroes, but know that my death is the final payment for your life. Without hesitation, the ram offered itself to the sacrificial knife it had helped the children escape, its golden blood soaking into foreign soil as its spirit ascended to take its place among the stars. Phrixus, overwhelmed by gratitude and grief, carefully removed the miraculous fleece and dedicated it to Zeus, hanging it in a sacred grove, where it would be guarded by a dragon that never slept, where it would become the object of the greatest quest in mythological history. And so the ram that saved a child from sacrifice became a sacrifice itself, its essence scattered across the spring sky as the constellation Aries, the first sign of the zodiacal wheel. When we look up at those stars that mark the beginning of the astrological year, we are not seeing a symbol of simple courage or leadership. We are witnessing the eternal monument to a mother's love, a child's terror, divine intervention, and the terrible mathematics of survival that sometimes demands one life in exchange for another. The stars of Aries remind us that true leadership often begins not with bold charges into battle, but with desperate flights from impossible situations. They whisper that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act decisively when fear threatens to paralyze us completely. The ram's constellation teaches us that sometimes salvation comes at a price we never expected to pay, and that the very qualities we most admire, bravery, determination, the willingness to take risks, are often forged in the crucible of trauma and loss. As Aries fades into the western sky and makes way for the next constellation in our celestial story, the ram's golden fleece continues to catch starlight, a eternal reminder that behind every symbol of strength lies a story of vulnerability. Behind every tale of rescue lies the shadow of what was lost in the saving. The ram charges forward through the darkness because it remembers what it is to flee. And in that memory lies both the power and the pathos of the first sign of the zodiac. The next constellation rises in the east, its own story of transformation and deception beginning to unfold, as a god prepares to wear the shape of beauty to disguise the ugliness of his desire. As the golden ram fades into memory and the wheel of stars continues its eternal turn, there rises in the eastern sky a creature of such magnificent beauty that mortal eyes can hardly bear to witness its splendor. The constellation Taurus emerges like a dream made manifest in starlight, its celestial form embodying everything we associate with earthly strength, sensual pleasure, and steadfast devotion. We see in this stellar bull the qualities we most admire: patience, determination, loyalty, and an appreciation for life's finer pleasures. But the true origin of this constellation speaks to desires far darker than any earthly longing, to power wielded without consent, and to the terrible beauty that can disguise the most heinous acts. The story begins with Zeus, king of the gods, whose appetite for mortal beauty was as boundless as his dominion over sky and storm. From his throne on Mount Olympus, his divine gaze fell upon Europa, daughter of King Agenor of Phoenicia, and in that moment of first seeing, something shifted in the cosmic order itself. Europa was not merely beautiful, she was beauty itself, given human form. Her movements like water flowing over stone, her laughter like the first music ever heard, her presence so radiant that flowers bloomed where her feet touched the earth. But Zeus had learned, through countless centuries of divine existence, that mortals flee from gods when they appear in their true forms. Thunder and lightning, divine radiance, and celestial authority. These things terrify rather than seduce, inspire worship rather than love. So the king of gods, master of all transformation, began to consider what shape might best serve his desires. What form might approach this exquisite mortal without triggering her natural fear of the divine? He chose the shape of a bull, but not just any bull. This would be a creature so perfect, so magnificent, that it seemed to have stepped from the dreams of artists who dared to imagine what earthly beauty might become in its most perfected form. His hide was white as fresh snow on mountain peaks, unmarked by any blemish or scar, catching and reflecting light as if it were spun from moonbeams themselves. His horns curved like crescents carved from ivory, adorned with garlands of flowers that never wilted, never lost their intoxicating fragrance. His eyes held depths of gentle wisdom that spoke of intelligence far beyond any mortal beast, while his movements carried a grace that made even the most elegant dancers seem clumsy by comparison. When this magnificent creature appeared among the herds that grazed near the shores where Europa walked with her maidens, it seemed like a gift from the gods themselves, which in the cruelest irony it truly was. The bull showed no aggression, no hint of the wild nature that made other bulls dangerous to approach. Instead, it moved among the other cattle like a king among subjects, its presence transforming the entire herd into something more beautiful, more peaceful, more perfect than nature had ever intended. Europa, drawn by curiosity and enchanted by the creature's otherworldly beauty, approached slowly, her maidens hanging back in nervous excitement. The bull Zeus, in his carefully crafted disguise, its massive head in apparent submission, allowing her to touch its silken hide, to weave flowers through its horns, to whisper sweet words of admiration into its attentive ears. With each gentle touch, with each moment of trust, the trap grew tighter, though Europa had no way of knowing that she was being hunted by the most powerful predator in existence. The bull knelt gracefully before her, as if offering itself as a mount for her amusement, and Europa, laughing with delight at this display of gentle intelligence, gathered her robes and climbed upon its broad back. Her maidens called out warnings, but their voices seemed distant and unimportant as the bull remained perfectly still, allowing her to settle comfortably, allowing her to feel safe and secure in her elevated position. Only when her grip was firm and her guard completely lowered did Zeus reveal the first hint of his true nature. The transformation began slowly, the bull's muscles tensing beneath her, its breathing deepening, its stance shifting from docile submission to barely contained power. Before Europa could react, before she could even cry out in alarm, the creature launched itself toward the sea with speed that defied natural law. No earthly bull could move with such fluid grace, such terrifying swiftness, and as the shore fell away behind them, Europa finally understood that she was no longer dealing with any mortal beast. The bull plunged into the Mediterranean waters without breaking stride, its hooves finding purchase on waves as if they were solid ground, its powerful form cutting through the sea as easily as it had moved across land. Europa clung to its neck in desperate terror, her earlier delight transformed into the kind of fear that stops the heart and steals the breath. Behind her, her maidens' voices grew fainter and fainter, their reaching hands becoming distant specks, then vanishing entirely as the bull carried her beyond all hope of rescue or return. Dolphins rose from the depths to escort this divine procession, their sleek forms dancing around the bull as if celebrating some cosmic wedding that only they understood. Sea nymphs emerged from their coral palaces to witness the passage of their king in his stolen form, their songs mixing with Europa's sobs to create a haunting melody that would echo in sailors' dreams for centuries to come. The very waves seemed to part before them, creating a path across the wind-dark sea toward destinations known only to the gods. As they traveled, Zeus began to reveal his true nature gradually, allowing his divine power to show through the bull's form without completely abandoning the disguise that had served him so well. His eyes began to glow with celestial fire. His voice took on the rumbling authority of thunder. And Europa realized with growing horror that she had been claimed not by any earthly creature, but by a god whose desires were as vast and implacable as the sky itself. They reached the shores of Crete as the sun was setting, painting the waters in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to mirror the divine fire now burning openly in the bull's eyes. There, on that foreign shore, far from everything Europa had ever known, Zeus finally revealed himself in his true form, his divine radiance both terrible and beautiful to behold. Europa, overwhelmed by the reality of her situation, could only weep for the life she had lost, the family she would never see again, the future that had been stolen from her in a moment of trust and wonder. But Zeus, in his divine narcissism, chose to interpret her tears as tears of joy, her trembling as evidence of her awe at his magnificence. He spoke to her of the honor he had bestowed upon her, of the great destiny that awaited her as the mother of kings, of the continent that would bear her name for all eternity. Yet all his divine rhetoric could not change the fundamental truth that what he called love was theft, what he called honor was violation, what he called destiny was the destruction of a young woman's right to choose her own path. Europa would indeed become the mother of kings, would indeed have a continent named in her memory. But the cost of such honor was the complete erasure of the person she had been before that white bull appeared among the herd. The constellation Taurus now hangs in our night sky as a monument to this act of divine abduction, its stellar form forever frozen in the moment of deception. When desire disguised itself as gentleness, when power wore the mask of beauty, when we look up at those stars that form the bull's outline, we are not seeing a simple symbol of earthly strength or sensual pleasure. We are witnessing the eternal reminder that beauty can be weaponized, that trust can be betrayed, that even gods are capable of acts that would be condemned if committed by mortals. The constellation Taurus teaches us to look beyond surface appearances, to question the motivations behind even the most magnificent displays, to remember that sometimes the most beautiful gifts come with prices we never agreed to pay. The bull's stars shine down upon us with deceptive serenity, their light carrying across the centuries the echo of Europa's cries as she was carried away from everything she had ever known. They remind us that the qualities we associate with Taurus, patience, persistence, sensuality, can just as easily serve predatory purposes as benevolent ones, that the very steadfastness we admire can become obsession when divorced from respect and consent. As the bull's constellation reaches its zenith and begins its descent toward the western horizon, its stellar horns point toward the next chapter in our zodiacal journey, where two figures approach in the eastern sky, brothers bound by love and separated by fate, teaching us that even the closest bonds can be tested by the ultimate divide between mortal flesh and immortal spirit. Gemini, the twins, torn between life and death. As the deceptive beauty of the celestial bull fades into the western darkness, two new figures emerge in the eastern sky, their stellar forms so closely intertwined that they seem to dance together through the cosmic void. These are the twins of Gemini, and in their eternal embrace we see what appears to be the perfect symbol of communication, duality, and playful interaction. Modern astrology tells us they represent the quick-witted messenger, the social butterfly, the one who can see both sides of any argument. But the true story of these stellar siblings speaks not of light-hearted duality, but of the most profound division possible, the terrible gulf between mortality and immortality, between those who must die and those who cannot. Their story begins in Sparta, where Queen Leda possessed a beauty so extraordinary that it attracted the attention of both gods and mortals alike. On a single fateful night, she was visited by her mortal husband, King Tyndareus, and also by Zeus in the form of a swan, another of his countless disguises worn to satisfy divine desire. From this impossible union came to eggs, and from those eggs hatched for children, whose fates would become inextricably woven into the fabric of myth itself. Helen, who would one day launch 1,000 ships, Clytemnestra, who would murder her husband in his bath, and the twins, Castor and Pollux, whose very existence embodied the fundamental divide between human and divine nature. Castor, son of the mortal king, possessed all the skills and limitations of humanity at its finest. He was a master horseman, a skilled warrior, renowned for his ability to tame even the wildest stallions and to fight with courage that bordered on the supernatural. But for all his extraordinary abilities, he remained fundamentally human, subject to pain, aging, and ultimately death. Pollux, son of Zeus, inherited his divine father's immortality, along with superhuman strength and boxing skills that made him undefeatable in combat. Yet, despite their different natures, the twins were inseparable from birth, their bond transcending the cosmic accident that had made them both brothers and opposites. They grew to manhood as heroes, their names spoken together so often that few could imagine one without the other. They sailed with Jason and the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece, that same fleece that had once adorned the ram that saved Phrixus from sacrifice. They participated in the hunt for the Caledonian boar, standing side by side against a monster sent by the gods to punish mortal hubris. In every adventure, every quest, every moment of triumph or danger, they were united, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. But even the strongest bonds cannot hold against the ultimate reality that separates mortal from immortal, and their tragedy began, as so many tragedies do, with a dispute over love. The twins had fallen in love with Phoebe and Hylera, daughters of Leucippus. But these women were already betrothed to their cousins, Idas and Lynceus. What followed was not a simple romantic rivalry, but a conflict that would test the very nature of brotherhood itself. The confrontation came to a head in a battle that pitted brother against cousin, divine strength against mortal fury, immortal endurance against human desperation. Pollux, with his godly powers, seemed invincible as he faced his opponents, his fists landing with the force of thunderbolts, his divine nature protecting him from mortal weapons. But Castor, for all his skill with horse and sword, remained vulnerable to the same injuries that could fell any human warrior. It was Idas who struck the fatal blow, his spear, finding the one gap in Castor's defenses, piercing the mortal twin's heart with iron forged in human furnaces, quenched in earthly water, wielded by hands that knew they were fighting against creatures partly divine. As Castor fell, his lifeblood soaking into the ground that had given him birth, Pollux felt something break inside himself that went deeper than flesh, deeper than bone, deeper than the very essence of what he had believed himself to be. The immortal twin cradled his dying brother, feeling the warmth fade from flesh that had been part of his own identity since before birth. Castor's eyes, growing dim with approaching death, looked up at his brother with a mixture of love and terrible understanding. He was going to a place where Pollux could not follow, crossing a threshold that would separate them not just for years or decades, but for all eternity. The divine blood in Pollux's veins would ensure that he lived forever, while Castor's mortal nature condemned him to the realm of Hades, where even the most heroic souls became mere shadows of their former selves. In his anguish, Pollux cried out to his divine father, his voice carrying across the heavens with the pain of a heart being torn in half. "What good is immortality," he pleaded, "if I must spend it alone? What value is eternal life if it means eternal separation from the one who made existence meaningful?" His grief shook Olympus itself, for even the gods could recognize the authenticity of love that was willing to sacrifice everything, even immortality, for the sake of unity. Zeus, moved by his son's anguish, and perhaps remembering his own capacity for love beneath his divine callousness, offered a solution that was both merciful and cruel. Pollux could share his immortality with his brother, but at a terrible cost. They would spend alternate days in different realms. One day in Olympus among the gods, the next in Hades among the dead. They would be together, but never in the fullness of life, united, but forever cycling between the realm of the living and the kingdom of shadows. Pollux accepted without hesitation, choosing a compromised eternity with his brother over a perfect immortality alone. Zeus honored this sacrifice by placing them both among the stars, where they could shine together forever as the constellation Gemini, their stellar forms serving as an eternal reminder of love that refuses to accept separation, even when separation seems to be written into the very fabric of existence. But their celestial immortality carries within it the same duality that defined their earthly existence. During half of their cosmic cycle, the twins shine brightly in the night sky, their stars blazing with the full glory of divine immortality. During the other half, their light dims almost to invisibility as they descend to the shadowy realm where mortal souls await whatever lies beyond death. They are forever together, forever apart, forever cycling between the joy of reunion and the sorrow of division. When we look up at the stars of Gemini, we are not seeing a simple symbol of communication or intellectual curiosity. We are witnessing the eternal monument to love that refused to accept the limitations imposed by the cosmos itself. These stars teach us that the greatest tragedy is not death, but separation from those who give our lives meaning. They remind us that sometimes the most profound choices are not between good and evil, but between different types of suffering, different ways of honoring what we hold most dear. The twins constellation speaks to the fundamental duality of human existence. We are creatures caught between earth and heaven, mortality and dreams of permanence, the desire for independence and the need for connection. Castor and Pollux show us that even when we cannot have everything we want, love can find ways to transform limitation into a different kind of perfection, separation into a more complex form of unity. As the twins continue their eternal dance across the night sky, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, always together in their cosmic compromise, their story flows naturally into the next constellation rising in the east, a creature whose own tale of loyalty and sacrifice will reveal how even the smallest acts of devotion can earn a place among the stars, though the price of such honor may be far greater than anyone should ever be asked to pay. Cancer, the crab of cruel fate. As the stellar twins continue their eternal dance between light and shadow, a smaller figure emerges in the eastern sky, its form so modest among the grand constellations that ancient stargazers often overlooked it entirely. The constellation Cancer appears almost apologetic in its faintness, its stars barely bright enough to catch the eye, as if, even in death, it remembers the humility of its earthly existence. Modern astrology has transformed this humble crab into a symbol of nurturing, protection, and emotional depth, the guardian of home and hearth, the one who shelters loved ones beneath a protective shell. But the true story of this celestial crustacean reveals not a tale of noble guardianship, but one of blind loyalty, rewarded with casual destruction, of a creature whose only crime was obeying its divine mistress with unquestioning devotion. To understand the crab's story, we must first understand the depths of hatred that existed between Hera, queen of the gods, and Heracles, the greatest of mortal heroes. Heracles, son of Zeus, and the mortal woman Alcmene, served as a living reminder of her husband's countless infidelities. But more than that, he represented everything that Hera herself could never be. Where she was bound by divine protocol and the limitations of her role as Zeus's wife, Heracles was free to pursue glory through action. Where she could only plot and scheme from afar, he could face monsters and challenges with his own hands. His very existence was an insult to her dignity, and his success felt like a mockery of her power. Hera's persecution of Heracles began before his birth and continued throughout his life, manifesting in curses, madness, and the famous 12 labors that would have destroyed any lesser hero. But among all her divine schemes and supernatural torments, perhaps none was so petty, so cruel in its apparent insignificance, as the role she assigned to a simple crab that dwelled in the marshes near Lake Lerna. This was not a creature of particular size or ferocity, was simply a crab, going about its crab existence in the murky waters where reeds grew thick and the air hummed with the sound of insects. It had no great destiny, no heroic calling, no understanding of the cosmic forces that swirled around the actions of gods and heroes. It was, in every sense, an innocent bystander to the great events that would soon unfold around it. The scene of its doom was set when Heracles arrived at Lerna to face the second of his labors, the destruction of the Hydra, a monstrous serpent whose venomous breath could kill at a distance, and whose heads multiplied whenever one was severed. This was a creature born of primordial chaos, a thing of poison and regeneration that represented everything dark and twisted in the natural world. The battle between hero and monster shook the very foundations of the earth, their struggle sending shockwaves through the waters where our humble crab made its home. As Heracles grappled with the writhing monster, his divine strength pitted against the Hydra's supernatural regeneration, Hera watched from Olympus with growing frustration. Her champion monster, bred specifically to destroy her stepson, was losing ground to mortal determination and heroic strength. In her fury, she looked around desperately for anything anyone that might tip the balance of battle in her favor. Her divine gaze fell upon the small crab scuttling through the reeds, and in that moment of desperate hatred, she made a decision that would doom the innocent creature to a fate worse than simple death. "Go," she commanded, her voice reaching into the crab's simple mind with the irresistible force of divine will. "Attack the hero, bite his heel. Distract him so that my monster may prevail." The crab, compelled by divine command beyond its power to resist, emerged from its watery home and scuttled toward the battling giants. Its tiny claws, designed for catching small fish and defending against other crustaceans, clicked helplessly as it approached the hero whose fame had already spread across the known world. What could such a small creature do against Heracles, whose strength had strangled lions and whose arrows could pierce the hides of monsters? Yet loyalty to divine command drove it forward, and with courage born of complete ignorance of its own insignificance, the crab reached out and pinched Heracles' heel with all the strength its small body could muster. For just an instant, the hero's attention wavered as he felt the tiny pain, his focus shifting from the hydra's snapping heads to the small annoyance at his feet. It was exactly the distraction Hera had hoped for, except that it came too late to change the outcome of the battle. Heracles, irritated by this unexpected assault from such an unlikely quarter, lifted his foot and brought it down upon the crab with casual force, crushing the small creature instantly. Its shell cracked like an eggshell, its life ending not in the glory of battle, but in the mundane reality of being stepped on by someone who barely noticed its existence. The crab died as it had lived, small, humble, and utterly overshadowed by the greater forces that moved around it. But if the crab's death was inglorious, its reward was magnificent in its own terrible way. Hera, moved by what she chose to interpret as loyalty and sacrifice rather than simple obedience to divine coercion, decided to honor her fallen champion with immortality among the stars. The creature that had lived and died in obscurity was lifted to the heavens and placed in the zodiacal circle. Its faint stars, an eternal memorial to service rewarded with destruction. The constellation Cancer thus represents something unique among the zodiacal signs, not a hero or a god, not a creature of inherent power or significance, but a simple being whose only notable act was to obey a command that led directly to its own annihilation. Its stars shine with the dim light of duty performed without understanding, of loyalty that asks no questions and expects no reward beyond the satisfaction of having served. When we look up at the faint stars of Cancer, we are not seeing a symbol of protective, nurturing, or emotional security. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to blind obedience and its inevitable cost. The crab's constellation teaches us that sometimes loyalty is its own punishment, that following orders without question can lead us to act against our own interests and even our own survival. It reminds us that divine favor often comes at a price that the favored never agreed to pay. Yet there is something deeply moving about the crab's story. Something that speaks to the dignity that can exist even in the most humble service. The creature did what it was asked to do, regardless of the consequences to itself. It faced impossible odds without hesitation, not because it was brave, but because it was faithful. Its death was meaningless in the context of the great battle. But its willingness to act when called upon speaks to a kind of virtue that requires no grand gestures or heroic speeches. The stars of Cancer flicker with the quiet light of those who serve without glory, who do their duty without recognition, who face destruction with the simple courage of creatures who know no other way to be. They remind us that honor can be found in the smallest acts, that immortality sometimes comes to those who never sought it, and that even the gods occasionally recognize the value of loyalty, even when that loyalty leads directly to doom. As the humble crab's constellation continues its modest journey across the night sky, its faint stars preparing to make way for a much brighter presence rising in the east, we prepare to encounter a creature whose story embodies the opposite extreme, not humble service, but magnificent terror, not quiet loyalty, but the kind of monstrous power that makes heroes famous and kingdoms tremble. Leo, the lion no blade could kill. From the faint and humble stars of the celestial crab, our gaze is drawn inexorably eastward to a constellation that blazes across the night sky with the fierce pride of a creature that knew no equal in its earthly existence. Leo rises like a golden fire among the stars, its stellar mane flowing with cosmic radiance, its powerful form stretched across the heavens in an eternal display of magnificent strength. We see in this stellar lion all the qualities we associate with nobility, courage, dignity, leadership, and the kind of natural majesty that makes others step aside in respect. But the true story of this celestial predator speaks not of noble leadership, but of supernatural terror, of a monster so perfectly designed for destruction that even the greatest of heroes could only defeat it through cunning and desperate innovation. In the hills outside Nemea, in a cave that descended so deep into the earth that its furthest reaches had never known sunlight, there dwelt a creature that represented the perfect fusion of divine wrath and natural ferocity. The Nemean lion was no ordinary beast. It was born of monsters, its lineage traced back to Echidna, mother of all horrors, and Typhon, the giant, whose very existence threatened to overthrow the gods themselves. Every aspect of the lion's being was crafted for a single purpose: to be utterly, completely, supernaturally unkillable. Its hide was not merely thick, but impervious, blessed or cursed by the gods to turn aside any weapon forged by mortal hands. Arrows shattered against its golden fur like twigs against stone. Spears bent and broke when thrust against its flanks. Swords dulled and chipped when swung at its neck. Its claws could cut through bronze shields as easily as a knife through silk, and its roar could be heard from miles around, striking such terror into the hearts of those who heard it that entire villages would flee at the first distant echo of its voice. The lion's hunting grounds encompassed all the territory around Nemea, a realm of rolling hills and dense forests that had once been populated by thriving communities of farmers, shepherds, and craftsmen. But as the monster's presence became known, as stories spread of livestock slaughtered, of armed warriors found torn apart on forest paths, of entire families vanishing without trace, the region transformed into a desolate wasteland, where nothing lived except the lion and the creatures too swift or too well hidden to attract its attention. This was the monster that Eurystheus, king of Tyrants, chose as the target for the first of Heracles' labors, though chose suggests a freedom of decision that the king did not truly possess. Hera, in her endless campaign against her stepson, had whispered in the king's ear, guiding him toward challenges that seemed impossible even for a hero of divine parentage. The Nemean lion appeared to be the perfect weapon to destroy Heracles once and for all, a creature against which strength would be useless, against which heroic courage would be merely a prelude to heroic death. When Heracles first arrived in the desolated region around Nemea, he found a landscape that seemed drained of all life and hope. The very air felt heavy with menace, and the silence was not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the oppressive stillness that comes when all living things hold their breath in fear. Even the birds had abandoned the area, leaving behind only the rustle of wind through empty branches and the distant, rhythmic sound of the lion's breathing echoing from its deep cave. The hero's first approach to the challenge was conventional, relying on the weapons and tactics that had served him well in previous battles. He crafted arrows with the finest bronze points, selected spears with shafts of seasoned ash, sharpened his sword until its edge could split hairs in the breeze. He approached the lion's cave with the confidence of one who had never met a foe that could not be defeated through the application of superior strength and skill. But when the Nemean lion emerged from its subterranean lair, stretching its massive form in the sunlight like a golden nightmare made manifest, Heracles discovered the terrible futility of mortal weapons against divine protection. His first arrow, shot with perfect aim at the creature's eye, struck the lion's face and fell harmlessly to the ground, its bronze point crumpled like a flower petal. His spear, hurled with all the force his divine strength could provide, struck the lion's flank and snapped in half, its point failing to penetrate even the surface of that supernatural hide. The lion, more amused than threatened by these conventional attacks, began to toy with its would-be slayer, demonstrating the casual ease with which it could avoid or absorb any assault the hero might devise. It moved with fluid grace despite its massive size, its golden fur rippling like liquid metal in the afternoon sun, its eyes holding an intelligence that seemed to mock the very concept of mortal ambition. As the sun began to set and conventional tactics proved utterly useless, Heracles was forced to acknowledge that this creature represented a new category of challenge entirely. This was not simply a matter of overpowering a strong opponent. This was a puzzle that required innovation, a riddle written in claw and fang that demanded a solution as unique as the monster itself. The breakthrough came when Heracles realized that if the lion's hide could not be pierced from the outside, perhaps there were other ways to approach the problem. The creature still needed to breathe, still needed to eat, still possessed all the basic vulnerabilities of any living thing. They were simply protected by that supernatural armor that made conventional attack impossible. What followed was perhaps the most brutal and primitive battle in all of heroic legend, a struggle that stripped away all pretense of civilized combat and reduced both combatants to their most fundamental natures. Heracles abandoned his weapons entirely and instead grappled with the lion, using nothing but his bare hands and his divine strength, turning the encounter into a contest of endurance as much as power. The battle raged for hours, hero and monster locked together in an embrace that was part wrestling match, part death struggle, and part primal dance of predator and prey. The lion's claws raked across Heracles' body, leaving wounds that would have killed any mortal man, while the hero's fingers searched desperately for some vulnerability, some gap in the supernatural armor that protected his opponent. Finally, as both combatants neared exhaustion, Heracles managed to position himself behind the great beast and lock his arms around its throat, using his divine strength not to crush the lion's neck, for even that mighty grip could not break through the magical hide butt to cut off its air supply. The hero began the long, agonizing process of strangling the monster with his bare hands. The lion struggled magnificently, its powerful body thrashing and twisting as it fought against this new form of assault. But gradually its movements became weaker, its roars fainter, until, at last, the great predator lay still in the hero's arms. Heracles had achieved victory not through superior weapons or clever tactics, but through the most basic and brutal method possible. He had simply held on longer than his opponent could resist. But even in death, the Nemean lion provided one final challenge and one unexpected gift. When Heracles attempted to skin the creature to claim its hide as proof of his victory, he discovered that no knife could cut through the supernatural fur. No blade could pierce what had protected the lion in life. It was only when he realized that the lion's own claws were the sole instruments capable of cutting its hide that he was able to complete his task, using the monster's own weapons against its body to claim the trophy that would become his signature armor. The lion's hide worn as a cloak with the great head serving as a helmet would protect Heracles throughout the remainder of his labors and adventures, transforming the hero's appearance into something that inspired both awe and terror in those who encountered him. He had literally clothed himself in the strength of his enemy, taking on the very invulnerability that had made the creature seem so invincible. Zeus, moved by the magnificence of both combatants and the epic nature of their struggle, placed the Nemean lion among the stars as the constellation Leo, its stellar form forever frozen in the moment of its greatest power and pride. The lion's constellation serves as an eternal reminder that sometimes the most impressive strengths can become fatal weaknesses, that invulnerability can become a trap, and that even the most terrifying monsters can be defeated by those willing to abandon conventional wisdom and embrace innovative approaches to impossible problems. When we look up at the bright stars of Leo blazing across the summer sky, we are not seeing merely a symbol of courage or natural leadership. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to perfect predation, undone by perfect determination. The lion's constellation teaches us that true strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to continue fighting even when conventional advantages have been stripped away. It reminds us that sometimes victory requires us to abandon our preferred weapons and tools, to engage with challenges on terms we never expected to accept. The stars of Leo shine with the fierce light of creatures that knew no fear because they had never encountered anything worthy of fear. And in that light we can read both the glory and the tragedy of invincibility. They tell us that even the most perfectly designed strengths have limits, that even divine protection can be overcome by mortal determination and ingenuity, and that immortality among the stars sometimes comes to those who discover too late that being unkillable is not the same as being undefeatable. As the Golden Lion's constellation continues its majestic journey across the night sky, its stellar mane flowing with cosmic fire, it prepares to yield the celestial stage to a figure whose story speaks not of supernatural invulnerability, but of its exact opposite, a tale of perfect vulnerability, of innocence so pure that it could not survive contact with the corrupt world, of a goddess whose very nature made her an exile from the realm she had been born to protect. Virgo, the maiden of lost innocence. As the magnificent lion's constellation blazes its way across the celestial dome and begins its descent toward the western horizon, a new figure rises in the eastern sky with an ethereal grace that seems almost hesitant, as if uncertain whether it truly belongs among the bold heroes and monsters that dominate the zodiacal wheel. The constellation Virgo appears clothed in starlight that seems somehow sadder, more wistful than the fierce radiance of Leo or the deceptive beauty of Taurus. Modern astrology has transformed this stellar maiden into a symbol of practical wisdom, attention to detail, and earthly service, the one who brings order to chaos, who heals what has been broken, who serves others with humble devotion. But the true story of this celestial virgin speaks not of willing service, but of exile forced by despair, not of practical wisdom gained through experience, but of innocence so pure that it could not survive in a world grown cruel and corrupt. Her name was Astrea, and she was born in an age when God still walked freely among mortals, when the boundary between heaven and earth was as permeable as morning mist. She was daughter to Zeus and Themis, goddess of divine law and order. But her inheritance from her parents was not power over storm and thunder, nor authority over justice and punishment. Instead, she received something infinitely more precious and infinitely more fragile, nature so pure, so untouched by corruption or compromise, that her very presence could transform the world around her into something approaching the paradise that existed before gods and mortals learned to lie, to cheat, to murder, and to betray. This was the Golden Age, that mythical time when humanity lived in harmony with the natural world and with each other, when there was no need for laws, because no one had yet conceived of breaking them, when weapons were unknown because violence was unthinkable, when death came only as a gentle sleep at the end of long, peaceful lives filled with simple pleasures and innocent joys. Astrea moved through this world like a living blessing, her footsteps causing flowers to bloom, her voice inspiring birds to sing more sweetly, her presence turning every gathering into a celebration of the fundamental goodness that existed at the heart of all creation. She was justice incarnate, but not the stern, sword-bearing justice we know today. Rather, she embodied the kind of justice that flows naturally from hearts that have never known hatred, from minds that have never conceived of deception, from souls that understand fairness not as a complex legal principle but as the most basic expression of love for all living things. Under her influence, disputes resolved themselves through compassion rather than punishment. Differences were settled through understanding rather than force, and the very concept of crime seemed as foreign and impossible as flying without wings. But paradise, as all myths teach us, carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction, and the Golden Age could not last forever. Humanity began to change, influenced by factors that the purest heart could not understand, and the most perfect justice could not prevent. Perhaps it was simple curiosity that led mortals to experiment with selfishness. Or maybe it was the natural restlessness that comes from having no challenges to overcome, no struggles to define character, no obstacles to prove worth. Whatever the cause, the change began slowly but accelerated with each generation, like a crack in a perfect crystal that starts small but inevitably spreads until the entire structure shatters. The Silver Age dawned with the introduction of seasons, of scarcity, of the need to work for survival rather than simply gathering what nature freely provided. Astrea watched with growing sadness as mortals learned to compete with each other for resources, as they developed the concepts of ownership and possession, as they began to see their neighbors as potential threats rather than eternal friends. Still, she remained among them, her presence serving as a reminder of what they had been. her example inspiring at least some to resist the growing tide of selfishness and suspicion. But the Silver Age gave way to the Bronze Age, and the Bronze Age brought with it innovations that would have been unthinkable in earlier times. Mortals learned to forge weapons, not just tools for hunting and farming, but instruments designed specifically to harm other human beings. They discovered warfare, conquest, the bitter pleasure of dominating those weaker than themselves. They developed the concept of slavery, the idea that some people existed merely to serve the convenience of others. They created systems of law, not to protect the innocent, but to legitimize the oppression of the powerless by the strong. Astrea found herself increasingly isolated in this changing world, her pure nature making her unable to adapt to or even comprehend the moral compromises that mortals now accepted as normal parts of existence. She tried to continue her work, to serve as a beacon of the old ways, but her very presence began to seem like a rebuke to those who had chosen darker paths. Her justice, based on love and understanding, seemed naive and ineffective when confronted with calculated cruelty and deliberate evil. Her innocence, once a source of healing and inspiration, now seemed like willful blindness to the harsh realities of the world as it had become. The final break came with the Iron Age, that era of unrestrained violence and corruption, when mortals embraced wickedness not just as a necessary tool for survival, but as an end in itself. They learned to take pleasure in the suffering of others, to find entertainment in cruelty, to worship power divorced from any consideration of justice or mercy. They created gods in their own image, capricious, violent, petty beings who demanded sacrifice and submission rather than offering love and guidance. Astrea stood at the center of this transformed world, like a single candle in a hurricane, her light growing dimmer and more fragile with each passing day. The very air seemed poisoned by the hatred and violence that had become humanity's default mode of existence. The earth itself, once fertile and generous, began to resist the cultivation of people who had learned to see it only as something to be exploited and dominated. The animals, once friendly companions to mortals, fled to the deepest forests and highest mountains, to escape the casual cruelty that humans now displayed toward all living things. Unable to bear witness to any more degradation, unable to maintain her essential nature in a world that had become antithetical to everything she represented, Astrea made the most heartbreaking decision in mythological history. She abandoned the earth entirely, fleeing upward to the celestial realm where she could preserve her purity, but could no longer offer it as a gift to those who had chosen to reject it. Her departure was not angry or vindictive. She possessed no capacity for such emotions, but it was final and irrevocable. As she rose through the atmosphere, leaving behind the world that had given her birth and purpose, her tears fell like silver rain upon the earth below, each drop carrying within it the memory of what had been lost, the echo of an innocence that would never return. The mortals who witnessed her ascension wept as well, though many of them could not understand why they felt such profound grief at the departure of someone whose very existence had made them uncomfortable with their own choices. Zeus, her divine father, welcomed her return to Olympus with mixed emotions. He was glad to have his daughter safe from the corruption that had consumed the mortal world. But he also understood that her exile represented something profound and terrible, the definitive end of an age when gods and mortals could coexist in harmony, when divine justice could be expressed through love rather than punishment, when the universe itself seemed to favor goodness over evil. To honor both her sacrifice and the loss her departure represented, Zeus placed Astrea among the stars as the constellation Virgo, the eternal maiden whose stellar form serves as a reminder of humanity's lost innocence. But this celestial immortality came with its own form of tragedy. She would shine down upon the world, forever watching over the descendants of those who had driven her away, offering her distant light to guide them, but never again able to walk among them, to touch their lives directly, to offer the immediate presence that had once transformed everything it encountered. The constellation Virgo thus represents something unique among the zodiacal signs. Not a hero's triumph or a monster's defeat, but a goddess's exile, a voluntary abandonment of the world by one too pure to survive its corruption. When we look up at her stars scattered across the autumn sky, we are not seeing a symbol of practical service or analytical thinking. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to lost paradise, the eternal reminder of what humanity gave up when it chose experience over innocence, power over love, complexity over the simple beauty of trust. Astrea's constellation teaches us that some losses are so profound they reshape the entire cosmos, that some departures leave wounds that never heal, that some forms of purity are too precious for this world, but too valuable to let die entirely. Her stars shine with the light of perfect virtue preserved in celestial amber, forever beautiful, forever unreachable, forever serving as both inspiration and rebuke to those who look up from the world she could no longer bear to inhabit. Yet there is also hope in her stellar form, for the myth's promise that Astrea will one day return to Earth, that the wheel of ages will turn full circle and bring back the golden age of peace and innocence she represented. Her constellation serves not just as a memorial to what was lost, but as a promise of what might be restored, a reminder that even the most complete exile is not necessarily permanent, that even the most profound corruption might one day be cleansed by the return of perfect justice and perfect love. As the maiden's constellation continues its stately progress across the night sky, her stellar form seeming to carry within it all the sadness of voluntary exile and all the hope of eventual return, she prepares to share the heavens with a very different sort of figure, not a goddess fleeing from corruption, but the very instrument of divine judgment itself, the cosmic scales that weigh souls and determine the fates of mortals and immortals alike. Libra, the scales of judgment and cosmic balance. As the ethereal form of the celestial maiden reaches its zenith and begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, carrying with it the memory of lost innocence and the promise of eventual return, a new figure emerges in the eastern sky that seems almost alien among the living creatures and divine beings that populate the zodiacal wheel. The constellation Libra rises like a geometric abstraction made manifest in starlight, its stellar form depicting not an animal or person, but an instrument, the scales of divine justice suspended in the cosmic void like a challenge to every living thing that dares to exist. Unlike every other sign in the zodiac, Libra represents not flesh and blood, not passion and desire, not the triumph or tragedy of individual beings, but pure concept made visible, the abstract principle of balance and judgment given stellar form. Modern astrology has softened this cosmic instrument into a symbol of harmony, partnership, and social grace, the diplomat who seeks middle ground, the aesthete who appreciates beauty, the peacemaker who helps others find compromise. But the true story of these celestial scales speaks not of gentle harmony, but of the terrible mathematics of cosmic justice, the inexorable weighing of souls that determines who rises to divine favor and who falls to eternal punishment. These are the scales that once rested in the hands of Astrea herself, during those golden days when she walked among mortals and dispensed justice through love rather than law. But when the goddess of innocence could no longer bear the corruption of the Iron Age and fled to the celestial realm, her scales remained behind, transformed from an instrument of mercy into a symbol of the stern judgment that must replace compassion when compassion proves insufficient to maintain cosmic order. The scales found their new bearer in Dike, Astrea's sister, another daughter of Zeus and Themis, but one whose nature was fundamentally different from the gentle goddess who had abandoned the earth. Where Astrea embodied justice as love made manifest, Dike represented justice as mathematical principle, the cold calculation that weighs actions against consequences without regard for intention, circumstance, or the pleas of those being judged. Her justice was not cruel, but it was absolutely impartial, as inevitable as gravity and as final as death itself. Under Dike's authority, the scales took on their true cosmic function, not merely to arbitrate disputes between mortals, but to weigh the very souls of all who lived and died, to measure the accumulated weight of every choice made, every word spoken, every thought harbored in the secret chambers of the heart. These were scales that could detect the difference between truth and falsehood with absolute precision, that could measure the exact weight of guilt and innocence, that could determine with mathematical certainty whether a soul deserved reward or punishment in whatever existence lay beyond mortal death. The process of divine judgment was not a single moment of evaluation, but a continuous weighing that began with birth and continued through every instant of existence. Each act of kindness added weight to one side of the scales, each moment of cruelty to the other. Each truth spoken brightened the balance, each lie darkened it, each sacrifice made for others elevated the soul being measured. Each selfish choice dragged it down toward whatever fate awaited those whose lives had accumulated more shadow than light. But the scales did not merely weigh individual souls. They served as the cosmic instrument that maintained the balance of the universe itself, ensuring that the total amount of justice in existence remained constant, even as individual fates varied wildly. When mortals acted with exceptional virtue, their good deeds created a surplus of positive energy that the scales redistributed to prevent others from falling into despair. When they chose evil, their dark actions created deficits that had to be balanced by corresponding increases in virtue elsewhere, or by divine intervention that restored equilibrium through punishment and correction. This cosmic balancing act was not gentle or forgiving, it was the fundamental mechanism that prevented the universe from collapsing into either pure chaos or sterile perfection, maintaining the dynamic tension between order and freedom that made existence possible. The scales represented the divine recognition that absolute goodness would eliminate the possibility of moral choice, while absolute evil would destroy the very foundation upon which choice could be exercised. The most terrifying aspect of these celestial scales was their perfect accuracy and complete incorruptibility. They could not be bribed, could not be fooled by false appearances, could not be influenced by social status, political power, or personal relationships. A king's gold weighed exactly the same as a beggar's copper coin when measured against the scale of moral worth. A priest's prayers carried no more weight than a criminal's honest confession. The scales recognized only the essential moral reality of each action, stripping away all the justifications, excuses, and self-deceptions that mortals used to convince themselves that their choices were more virtuous than they actually were. This absolute moral clarity made the scales both a source of comfort and a cause of terror. Those who lived virtuous lives could take solace in the knowledge that their good deeds would be recognized and rewarded with perfect accuracy. But those who had compromised their principles, who had chosen convenience over conscience, who had rationalized their way into moral ambiguity, faced the prospect of being weighed and found wanting by an instrument that acknowledged no extenuating circumstances, no mitigating factors, no second chances. The constellation Libra emerged when Zeus decided that the scales themselves deserved immortalization among the stars, recognizing that the principle of cosmic justice was as fundamental to the structure of reality as the forces that held planets in their orbits and stars in their courses. The scales were lifted to the heavens, not as a reward for service, but as an acknowledgement of their essential role in maintaining the moral architecture of the universe. But their stellar form carries within it a reminder of something that mortals often prefer to forget, that every action has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment, that every choice tips the cosmic balance in one direction or another, that the universe itself is constantly taking note of how we conduct ourselves and adjusting the fundamental forces of existence accordingly. When we look up at the stars of Libra hanging in the autumn sky like a cosmic question mark, we are not seeing a gentle symbol of harmony and cooperation. We are witnessing the stellar representation of divine judgment, the eternal reminder that balance in the universe is not a natural state, but a continuously maintained equilibrium that requires constant vigilance and occasional dramatic correction. The Scales constellation teaches us that true justice is not about finding comfortable compromises or splitting differences down the middle, but about accurately measuring the moral weight of our actions and accepting the consequences that perfect accuracy demands. They remind us that the harmony we associate with Libra in modern astrology is not the easy piece of avoiding difficult choices, but the hard-won balance that comes from consistently choosing virtue even when virtue demands sacrifice. The stars of Libra shine with the cold light of mathematical precision, their stellar positions maintaining perfect equilibrium, not because balance is easy, but because the alternative moral chaos would destroy everything worth preserving. They tell us that sometimes the most loving thing the universe can do is weigh us accurately and respond to what it finds with absolute honesty, even when that honesty brings consequences we would prefer to avoid. As the celestial scales continue their eternal measurement of cosmic justice, their stellar form perfectly balanced in the night sky like a challenge to every observer to consider their own moral weight. They prepare to yield the astronomical stage to a creature whose story represents the darkest possible outcome of that divine weighing, being so consumed with vengeance that it became the instrument of its own cosmic justice, forever frozen in the moment of dealing death to one who had challenged the fundamental order of the natural world. Scorpio, the scorpion of vengeance, as the perfect balance of the celestial scales reaches its apex and begins its measured descent toward the western darkness, maintaining its cosmic equilibrium even in motion. A new constellation rises in the eastern sky with an energy so intense, so charged with primal purpose, that it seems to set the very stars ablaze with its stellar fire. The constellation Scorpio emerges like a creature born from the marriage of shadow and flame, its distinctive form stretched across the night sky in a posture of eternal readiness, its stellar tail curved in the unmistakable arc of a stinger poised to strike. Modern astrology has transformed this celestial arachnid into a symbol of passion, transformation, and emotional depth, the one who dives fearlessly into life's mysteries, who faces the darkness within and without, who emerges from destruction renewed and strengthened. But the true story of this stellar scorpion speaks not of voluntary transformation, but of vengeance, so pure and absolute that it reshaped the very heavens themselves, creating an eternal monument to the terrible price of challenging the natural order. The story begins with Orion, the most magnificent hunter who ever walked the earth, a giant among mortals whose beauty and skill were legendary throughout the ancient world. Born of divine parentage, some say his father was Poseidon, god of the seas, while others claim he sprang from the earth itself. When the gods blessed barren ground with their combined essence, Orion possessed strength that rivaled the heroes of old and hunting abilities that surpassed even the gods themselves. His arrows never missed their mark, his spear could pierce the hide of any creature, and his presence in the wilderness was so commanding that wild animals would flee at his approach, recognizing in him a predator beyond their ability to resist or escape. But Orion's greatest asset was also his fatal flaw. He possessed an arrogance so vast, so completely divorced from humility or respect for divine authority, that it transformed his magnificent abilities into instruments of cosmic offense. He did not hunt for survival, for sport, or even for the joy of the chase, but to prove a point that no mortal should ever attempt to make, that he was superior to the gods themselves in the one arena where divine authority seemed most established and unquestionable. Orion began to boast, his voice carrying across valleys and mountain ranges, as he proclaimed his superiority to anyone who would listen. He was the greatest hunter in existence, he declared, greater than Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, greater than her brother, Apollo, greater than any divine being who claimed dominion over the wilderness and its creatures. To prove his claims, he embarked upon a hunting spree that was less sport than systematic genocide, pursuing not just individual animals but entire species, declaring his intention to kill every living creature on earth until none remained but himself, the ultimate predator, standing triumphant over a world emptied of all other life. The scale of Orion's assault on the natural world was breathtaking in its ambition and terrifying in its implications. He hunted lions until their roars no longer echoed across the savannas, pursued bears until the mountains fell silent, tracked wolves until the howling ceased in the dark forests. His arrows found eagles in their highest flights. His spears reached fish in their deepest waters. His traps caught creatures that had never before known fear of mortal hunters. The very earth began to mourn the loss of its children, while the sky grew quiet as birds fell victim to the hunter's impossible skill. But Orion's campaign of extermination did not go unnoticed by the divine powers who had created and nurtured the world he was systematically destroying. Artemis, goddess of the hunt and protector of wild things, watched with growing horror as the mortal hunter perverted everything she represented, turning her sacred activity into an act of cosmic vandalism. Her own hunting was always measured, always respectful of the balance between predator and prey, always conducted with awareness that taking life was a sacred responsibility that required reverence and restraint. Orion's hunting was the exact opposite of celebration of destruction for its own sake, a demonstration of power divorced from wisdom or respect. Some versions of the myth suggest that Artemis herself was briefly seduced by Orion's magnificence, that she allowed herself to be drawn into his company, and perhaps even to feel something approaching attraction for this mortal who seemed to match her own connection to the wilderness. But if such feelings existed, they were quickly overshadowed by her growing recognition that Orion represented not a kindred spirit, but a fundamental threat to everything she held sacred. The final insult came when Orion, drunk on his own success and convinced of his superiority to all other beings, divine or mortal, made a declaration that sealed his doom with its sheer hubris. Standing atop a mountain of carcasses representing dozens of species, his arms raised to the heavens in a gesture of triumph, he shouted his ultimate boast. He would kill every animal on earth, would empty the world of all life, except his own, would prove once and for all that mortal skill could surpass divine power in the most fundamental arena of existence. It was then that Gaia, the Earth Mother herself, stirred to action. The systematic destruction of her children had awakened something in the primordial goddess that went beyond anger, beyond wrath, into a realm of cosmic justice, so pure and terrible that it could only be expressed through the creation of an instrument of vengeance perfectly designed to end the threat that Orion represented. From the deepest caves, from the secret places where life first learned to defend itself against death, she called forth a creature that embodied everything Orion feared most, not another animal to be hunted, but a hunter that would hunt him. The scorpion that emerged from the earth was not large, especially compared to the giant hunter it was destined to face, but size was irrelevant to its purpose. This creature was pure, concentrated death, every aspect of its being designed to end life swiftly and without possibility of resistance or escape. Its exoskeleton was harder than bronze, impervious to arrows and spears, while its movements were so swift and fluid that it seemed to flow across the ground like liquid shadow. But most terrifying of all was its tail, curved over its back in the characteristic arc that would become one of the most recognizable silhouettes in natural history, tipped with a stinger that carried venom so potent that a single drop could kill the mightiest hero in mere seconds. The scorpion's mission was simple, an absolute: find Orion and end his threat to the natural world, using whatever means necessary to accomplish this goal. It was not motivated by anger or personal hatred, but by the same kind of natural law that makes water flow downhill or causes the sun to rise each morning. Orion had upset the cosmic balance through his arrogant destruction, and the scorpion existed to restore that balance through his equally absolute elimination. The confrontation between hunter and scorpion was as inevitable as sunrise, and when it came, it revealed the fundamental difference between skill and nature, between mortal ability and cosmic justice. Orion, for all his legendary prowess, found himself facing an opponent that his weapons could not harm, his strength could not overpower, his speed could not outrun. The scorpion moved with purpose that transcended individual will, striking with precision that made even Orion's perfect aim seem clumsy by comparison. The battle was brief but decisive. Despite all his boasting, all his demonstrated superiority over every other creature he had faced, Orion could not adapt to an opponent that operated according to principles he had never encountered. The scorpion's stinger found its mark with the inevitability of divine judgment, piercing the hunter's skin and delivering venom that even his divine heritage could not resist. As Orion fell, his life ebbing away with each heartbeat, he finally understood the magnitude of his error. He had mistaken skill for wisdom, ability for authority, success for righteousness. The scorpion that killed him was not his enemy but the universe's correction to an imbalance he had created through his own arrogance and disrespect. Zeus, witnessing this cosmic drama play out, recognized that both combatants deserved immortalization among the stars. Orion for his magnificent abilities, despite their misuse, and the scorpion for its perfect fulfillment of natural law. But the king of gods also understood that their eternal conflict needed to be preserved in a way that honored both the tragedy of Orion's fall and the necessity of the scorpion's victory. The constellations were placed in the sky so that they could never appear together. When Scorpio rises in the east, Orion sets in the west. And when Orion climbs the eastern horizon, Scorpio disappears below the western edge of the world. Their chase continues eternally, the hunter forever fleeing from the instrument of his doom, the scorpion forever pursuing the target of its divine mission. When we look up at the stars of Scorpio blazing across the autumn sky, we are not seeing merely a symbol of passion or transformation. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to vengeance perfectly served, to natural law enforced without compromise, to the terrible beauty of justice that operates beyond human understanding or appeal. The Scorpion's constellation teaches us that there are limits to mortal ambition that cannot be crossed without consequences, that respect for the natural order is not optional for those who wish to survive their own success. The stars of Scorpio shine with the intensity of purpose, fulfilled their stellar light, carrying across the millennia the echo of that final, fatal sting that reminded the world that no mortal, no matter how gifted or successful, is exempt from the universal laws that govern all existence. They remind us that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when destruction serves a higher purpose, and when it merely feeds the ego's hunger for dominance. As the Scorpion's constellation continues its eternal hunt across the night sky, its stellar form forever poised to strike, it prepares to share the heavens with a figure whose own story speaks to different kinds of limits and different forms of wisdom. Centaur, whose divine knowledge could not save him from mortal suffering, whose immortality became a curse rather than a blessing, whose greatest act was the willing surrender of the very gift that made him unique among all beings. Sagittarius, the centaur who could not die. As the vengeful scorpion reaches its stellar zenith and begins its implacable pursuit toward the western horizon, forever chasing the ghost of ancient arrogance across the night sky, a new figure emerges in the eastern heavens, with a dignity that seems almost out of place among the tales of divine wrath and cosmic punishment that have preceded it. The constellation Sagittarius rises like a beacon of wisdom and learning, its stellar form depicting a centaur, half horse, half human, with bow drawn and arrow aimed at the heart of the galaxy itself. Modern astrology has embraced this celestial archer as a symbol of adventure, philosophy, and the eternal quest for truth. The wanderer who seeks knowledge beyond horizons, the teacher who shares wisdom freely, the optimist who believes that understanding can overcome any obstacle. But the true story of this stellar centaur speaks not of joyful wandering or easy wisdom, but of the most profound tragedy, possibly mortal suffering so intense that death becomes not an enemy to be feared, but a gift to be desperately sought. Among all the centaurs who roamed the ancient world, creatures notorious for their wild appetites, violent tempers, and complete lack of civilized behavior, there was one who stood apart like a philosopher among barbarians, a healer among destroyers, a teacher among those who gloried in ignorance. His name was Chiron, and from the moment of his birth he was marked as different from his savage kinsmen, blessed with wisdom that transcended his hybrid nature, and cursed with a sensitivity that made him acutely aware of every form of suffering that existed in the world. Unlike his fellow centaurs, who were born from the union of Ixion and a cloud shaped like Hera coupling that produced beings as violent and unstable as the storm winds themselves, Chiron was the son of the Titan Cronus and the nymph Philyra, a heritage that gave him not the brutal appetites of his supposed brethren, but a nature that combined the best of both divine and mortal qualities. His human torso housed a mind capable of understanding the deepest mysteries of existence, while his equine body gave him the strength and endurance necessary to wander the world in search of knowledge and those who needed his help. Chiron became the greatest teacher of heroes the ancient world ever knew, his cave on Mount Pelion serving as a school where the sons of gods and kings came to learn not just the arts of war and hunting, but the more subtle skills of healing music, prophecy, and wisdom. Under his guidance, Asclepius became the god of medicine. Orpheus learned to make music that could charm stones and tame wild beasts. Jason prepared for his quest for the Golden Fleece, and Achilles developed the skills that would make him the greatest warrior of the Trojan War. But Chiron's teaching went beyond technical instruction. He taught his students how to be truly human, how to balance strength with compassion, courage with wisdom, ambition with humility. He showed them that true heroism lay not in conquering others, but in conquering the darkness within themselves, that the greatest victories were won not on battlefields, but in the daily choice to act with honor, even when no one was watching. The centaur's wisdom came not from books or abstract philosophy, but from direct experience of both divine knowledge and mortal suffering. His immortal nature allowed him to accumulate centuries of learning and observation, to see the patterns that connected individual events to cosmic principles, to understand the deep structures that governed fate and choice. Yet his mortal sensibilities meant that he felt every tragedy, every loss, every moment of pain that touched the lives of those he taught and loved. This combination of immortal perspective and mortal empathy made Chiron uniquely qualified to guide heroes. But it also set the stage for a tragedy so profound that it would reshape his entire existence. The beginning of his doom came as so many mythological disasters do, from what should have been a moment of celebration and joy. The wedding of his former student Pirithous to Hippodamia, an occasion that brought together heroes from across the ancient world. The celebration was proceeding beautifully until other centaurs, Chiron's wild and uncivilized cousins, arrived uninvited and proceeded to demonstrate exactly why their kind was generally excluded from polite society. Inflamed by wine and overcome by lust, they attempted to carry off the bride and assault the other women at the wedding feast, turning a peaceful celebration into a battlefield as the heroic guests fought to protect the innocent. Among those who responded to the chaos was Heracles, Chiron's former student, whose arrows had been dipped in the hydra's venom during his second labor, making them weapons of absolute lethality. In the darkness and confusion of the battle, as centaurs and heroes fought desperately around the wedding pavilion. One of Heracles' poisoned arrows went astray, striking the one centaur who posed no threat to anyone who had come to the wedding not as a predator but as an honored guest. The arrow pierced Chiron's knee with the accuracy that had made Heracles famous, but the physical wound was trivial compared to the cosmic disaster that followed. The Hydra's venom, designed by the gods to be absolutely fatal, began to spread through the wise centaur's body, bringing with it pain so intense that it transcended mere dyscasical sensation and became a constant, overwhelming presence that colored every moment of existence with agony. But here the true horror of Chiron's situation revealed itself as an immortal being. He could not die from the poison that would have mercifully ended any mortal's suffering in minutes. Instead, he was condemned to endure the venom's effects forever, to experience every second of pain with perfect clarity, to face an eternity in which relief would never come and death would never offer its final blessing. The poison transformed Chiron's immortality from a gift into the cruelest possible curse. Every breath brought fresh waves of agony, every heartbeat carried the venom deeper into his system. Every moment of consciousness was a reminder that this suffering would never end, could never end, would continue with undiminished intensity for all the endless eons that stretched ahead of him. Yet, even in his torment, Chiron continued to teach and heal others. His wisdom deepened rather than diminished by his intimate acquaintance with suffering. He understood now, in ways he never had before, what it meant to face inevitable doom, to live with pain that could not be cured, to search desperately for hope in situations that offered none. His teachings took on new depth and authenticity as he spoke from personal experience about endurance, about finding meaning in the midst of meaningless suffering, about the courage required to continue existing when existence itself had become unbearable. For centuries, Chiron bore his agony with the dignity befitting the greatest teacher of heroes. But eventually, even his vast wisdom and enormous compassion could not sustain him against the relentless assault of the Hydra's venom. The centaur, who had taught others how to live with honor, began to long for the one thing his nature denied him: the peace of death, the final rest that would end his immortal suffering. The opportunity for release came through the tragic fate of Prometheus, the titan who had stolen fire from the gods to give to mortals and was being punished with his own form of eternal torment, chained to a rock while an eagle ate his liver each day, only to have it regenerate each night so the torture could begin anew. Zeus had decreed that Prometheus could only be freed if an immortal being willingly took his place, surrendering their own immortality to purchase the Titan's freedom. When Chiron heard of this possibility, he saw not a sacrifice, but a gift: the chance to trade his unwanted immortality for the death he had come to desire more than anything else in existence. The exchange would free Prometheus from his eternal punishment, while granting Chiron the final rest that had been denied him for so long. The bargain was struck with the solemnity befitting such a momentous decision. Chiron surrendered his immortality to Zeus, feeling it drain from his body like water flowing from a broken vessel, taking with it not only his endless lifespan, but also the poison that had tormented him for centuries. As mortality settled over him like a gentle blanket, the wise centaur experienced something he had not felt since that terrible arrow found its mark: the absence of pain, the peace of a body no longer at war with itself. His death, when it came, was gentle and dignified, the natural end to a life that had been extended far beyond its intended span. But Zeus, recognizing the magnitude of what Chiron had sacrificed and the nobility with which he had borne his suffering, decided that such wisdom and compassion deserved a different kind of immortality, not the curse of endless existence in a flawed body, but the blessing of eternal remembrance among the stars. The constellation Sagittarius emerged as Zeus placed Chiron among the celestial figures, his stellar form forever frozen in the act of drawing his bow, aiming his arrow not at any earthly target but at the very center of the galaxy, as if his wisdom had finally found a mark worthy of his divine teaching. The centaur's immortality among the stars carried none of the suffering that had made his earthly immortality unbearably. Instead, it represented the perfected form of his teaching, his wisdom, available to guide anyone who looked up at the night sky and remembered his story. When we look up at the constellation Sagittarius blazing across the winter sky, we are not seeing merely a symbol of adventure or philosophical inquiry. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to wisdom earned through suffering, to teaching that never lost its compassion despite experiencing the worst that existence could offer, to the ultimate act of heroism that chooses sacrifice over self-preservation. The centaur's stars shine with the light of hard-won, understanding their stellar positions, forming an eternal reminder that true wisdom comes not from avoiding suffering, but from learning how to transform it into something meaningful, something that can benefit others, even when it brings no relief to ourselves. Chiron's constellations teaches us that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is our own life, freely offered, not for glory or recognition, but simply because the exchange will reduce the total amount of suffering in the universe. As the wise centaur's stellar form reaches toward the galactic center with his eternal arrow, his story flows naturally into the next constellation rising in the eastern sky, a creature whose own relationship with the divine involved not voluntary sacrifice, but desperate survival. Not wisdom earned through suffering, but fear overcome through transformation. Not the giving up of immortality, but the discovery that even gods must sometimes flee from forces greater than themselves. Capricorn, the goat who fled in fear. As the noble centaur's constellation reaches its stellar apex and continues its eternal aim toward the heart of the galaxy, teaching us through starlight about wisdom born from suffering and sacrifice freely given, a new figure begins its ascent in the eastern sky with a form so strange, so fundamentally altered from its natural state, that it seems to embody the very concept of transformation born from terror. The constellation Capricorn rises like a creature caught between two worlds, its stellar body depicting the front half of a goat seamlessly merged with the tail of a fish, creating an image that speaks not of natural evolution, but of desperate metamorphosis. The kind of change that occurs when survival itself depends upon becoming something entirely different from what nature originally intended. This hybrid creature carries within its celestial form not one story but several, each tale contributing to the complex symbolism that would eventually transform Capricorn into astrology's sign of ambition, determination, and methodical progress toward long-term goals. But the true origins of this stellar sea-goat speak not of ambitious climbing toward success, but of flight from terror, so absolute that it reshaped the very essence of divine being, teaching us that even gods can know fear, even immortals can face threats that force them to abandon their essential nature in favor of whatever form might offer the slim possibility of survival. The primary story begins with Pan, the rustic god of shepherds and wild places, whose goat-like appearance and primitive nature made him seem almost crude compared to the polished divinities of Olympus. Pan was ancient even among the immortals, his origins stretching back to the earliest days of creation, when the boundaries between civilization and wilderness were not yet firmly established, when gods still resembled the natural forces they governed rather than the idealized human forms they would later adopt. Despite his seemingly simple nature, Pan possessed powers that made him essential to the cosmic order. His music could inspire both divine ecstasy and mortal madness. His presence could bring fertility to fields and flocks, and his connection to the primitive forces of nature made him a bridge between the civilized world of Olympus and the chaotic energies that existed before the gods brought order to the universe. He was contentment personified, satisfaction with simple pleasures, the divine embodiment of the idea that happiness could be found in harmony with natural rhythms rather than in the pursuit of complex ambitions. But Pan's peaceful existence was shattered by the emergence of Typhon, a monster so terrible that even the gods fled in terror at his approach. Typhon was not merely another creature to be defeated by heroic strength or divine power. He was chaos itself given physical form, a being whose very existence threatened to unravel the ordered cosmos that Zeus and his fellow Olympians had worked so hard to establish. His body was larger than mountains, his heads more numerous than the stars, his strength so vast that when he moved, earthquakes shook the foundations of the world and volcanoes erupted in sympathetic fury. When Typhon rose from the depths of the earth and began his assault on Olympus, the gods discovered something that shook them to their immortal cores. They were not invincible, not beyond the reach of destruction, not guaranteed to survive simply because they were divine. For the first time since their victory over the Titans, the Olympians faced an enemy that might actually succeed in destroying them, in reducing their carefully constructed cosmic order to the primordial chaos from which it had emerged. The response was not the noble, organized resistance one might expect from beings accustomed to ruling the universe, but panic so complete and desperate that it stripped away all pretense of divine dignity and revealed the gods as they truly were, powerful beings who, when faced with extinction, would do anything, become anything, sacrifice anything to preserve their existence. The great flight began as Typhon approached the borders of divine territory, his roars shaking the foundations of Mount Olympus itself. One by one, the gods abandoned their familiar forms and fled toward Egypt, transforming themselves into animals, birds, and other creatures that might escape the monster's notice or wrath. Zeus became a ram, Artemis a cat, Dionysus a goat. Aphrodite and Eros both became fish, each choosing whatever form seemed most likely to ensure survival, abandoning all concern for dignity or appropriateness in favor of the slim hope of continuing to exist. Pan, already more animal than human in his natural state, might have seemed better prepared for such transformation than his more refined divine cousins. But the terror that drove him toward the Nile River was so intense, so overwhelming, that it disrupted even his ability to maintain a single form. As he plunged into the sacred waters, desperate to escape Typhon's approach, his transformation became confused, incomplete, resulting in the hybrid form that would become his eternal, stellar monument. His front half remained that of a goat, maintaining connection to his original nature as a god of shepherds and wild places. But his rear portion became that of a fish, adapted for survival in an aquatic environment that was foreign to his essential character. The result was a creature that belonged fully to neither land nor water, neither his original divine nature nor his adopted disguise, but something new and strange that embodied the desperate compromise between what he had been and what he needed to become in order to survive. This transformation was not voluntary, not a conscious choice made with full understanding of its implications, but the result of panic so complete that it overrode divine will and created changes that could not be undone even after the immediate threat had passed. Pan's hybrid form became permanent, an eternal reminder of the moment when even a god's nature proved insufficient to guarantee survival against forces too vast and terrible to resist through power alone. But Capricorn's stellar form also carries within it the echo of another story, that of Amalthea, the goat who nursed the infant Zeus when he was hidden from his cannibalistic father, Cronus. This nurturing goat represented not flight from danger, but the courage to protect the future, to provide sustenance and care for the divine child, who would one day grow up to overthrow the Titans and establish the cosmic order that Typhon would later threaten. Amalthea's contribution to Zeus's survival was fundamental. Her milk provided the nourishment that allowed the future king of gods to grow strong enough to fulfill his destiny, while her presence offered comfort and protection during the most vulnerable period of his existence. When Zeus achieved his ultimate victory and claimed his throne on Olympus, he remembered the debt he owed to this humble goat and honored her by placing her among the stars, ensuring that her nurturing sacrifice would be remembered for all eternity. The constellation Capricorn thus represents the fusion of these two seemingly contradictory stories: Pan's desperate flight from overwhelming terror and Amalthea's courageous protection of divine potential. Together, they create a stellar symbol that embodies both the fear that drives us to abandon our essential nature and the love that motivates us to nurture what is most precious. Both the panic that forces desperate transformation and the steady determination that sustains growth through the most difficult circumstances. When we look up at the strange, stellar form of Capricorn climbing across the winter sky, we are not seeing merely a symbol of ambition or methodical progress. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to survival achieved through adaptation, to the discovery that sometimes preserving what matters most requires us to become something we never intended to be. The Sea Goat's constellation teaches us that transformation is not always chosen, that sometimes change is forced upon us by circumstances too powerful to resist, but that such changes can still serve purposes larger than our own immediate survival. The stars of Capricorn shine with the complex light of beings who have learned that flexibility is more valuable than rigid adherence to original nature, that survival sometimes requires us to embrace contradictions, to become creatures that embody seemingly incompatible elements in service of a larger purpose. They remind us that even divine beings must sometimes flee, must sometimes abandon their preferred forms and comfortable assumptions, must sometimes become hybrids of what they were and what they need to be in order to continue existing in a universe that does not guarantee anyone as survival simply because they believe they deserve it. As the Sea Goat's constellation continues its steady climb across the celestial dome, its hybrid form serving as an eternal reminder that survival often requires transformation we never chose. It prepares to share the night sky with another figure whose own story speaks to different kinds of transformation and different prices, paid for divine favor, beautiful youth whose elevation to the heavens came not through his own choices but through the overwhelming desires of those more powerful than himself. Aquarius, the cupbearer, stolen by the gods. As the hybrid sea-goat reaches its stellar summit and begins its descent toward the western horizon, carrying within its transformed shape the memory of divine panic and desperate adaptation, a new figure emerges in the eastern sky with a beauty so pure, so untainted by the fear and violence that have marked so many of our celestial tales, that it seems to offer hope for a different kind of story. The constellation Aquarius rises like a vision of youth and grace made manifest in starlight, its stellar form depicting a figure pouring water from an eternal urn, creating streams of celestial liquid that flow across the night sky in patterns too perfect to be natural, too purposeful to be accidental. Modern astrology has embraced this water-bearer as a symbol of innovation, humanitarian ideals, and revolutionary thinking, the visionary who brings new ideas to refresh stagnant traditions, the rebel who challenges authority in service of higher principles, the altruist who pours out their gifts freely for the benefit of all humanity. But the true story of this celestial figure speaks not of chosen service or revolutionary ideals, but of beauty so extraordinary that it became its own form of curse, attracting attention that transformed a simple shepherd boy into an eternal prisoner of divine desire, forever trapped in golden chains disguised as celestial honor. His name was Ganymede, and he was born to be a prince of Troy, the youngest son of King Taurus, destined for a life of earthly royalty, mortal love, and natural death, after a span of years filled with the ordinary pleasures and sorrows that define human existence. But the gods had marked him from birth with a beauty so perfect, so absolutely flawless, that it transcended mere physical attractiveness and became something approaching divine art made flesh. Ganymede possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations, that made hardened warriors weep without understanding why, that caused poets to abandon their carefully crafted verses, because no words could capture what they saw when they looked upon his face. His beauty was not aggressive or demanding, it was gentle, innocent, unmarked by vanity or calculation, the natural radiance of youth that has not yet learned to weaponize its own attractiveness, or to see itself as anything other than one person among many. He spent his youth in the hills outside Troy, tending his father's flocks with the unconscious grace of one who had never imagined that his appearance might make him the target of forces beyond his understanding or control. The sheep responded to his gentle voice, the dogs obeyed his quiet commands, and the other shepherds accepted him as one of their own, seeing past his extraordinary beauty to the kind and generous nature that lay beneath. But beauty like Ganymede's cannot remain hidden forever, especially when it reaches the level of perfection that challenges even divine aesthetics. Stories of the shepherd prince began to spread beyond the hills of Troy, carried by travelers and merchants who had glimpsed him in passing and found themselves unable to forget what they had seen. The tales grew in the telling, as such stories always do, until they reached the ears of those who had the power to act upon their desires, regardless of the consequences to their targets. Zeus, king of gods and master of transformation, heard these descriptions of mortal beauty that supposedly rivaled divine perfection, and his immortal curiosity was aroused. He had possessed countless mortal women, had taken whatever forms necessary to satisfy his desires. But the reports of Ganymede's beauty suggested something different, not just another conquest to be pursued and abandoned, but a treasure so rare that it deserved permanent preservation in the halls of Olympus itself. The gods' first sight of the shepherd prince confirmed everything the stories had promised and more. Ganymede moved through his pastoral duties with an unconscious grace that made even the most mundane activities, gathering straying sheep, mending broken fences, sharing simple meals with his fellow shepherds, seem like performances in some divine drama written specifically to showcase perfect beauty in natural settings. But Zeus' reaction to this beauty was not the aesthetic appreciation of an artist or the distant admiration of a philosopher contemplating ideal forms. Instead, it was the immediate, overwhelming desire of one accustomed to taking whatever caught his fancy, combined with the terrible realization that this particular treasure was too perfect to be left in the mortal world, where it might be damaged by time, violence, or simple human carelessness. The abduction itself was swift and decisive, employing the shape that had become Zeus's preferred form for such expeditions, that of an eagle, the king of birds, whose natural majesty and divine authority made resistance seem not just futile, but somehow inappropriate. The great bird descended from the clear sky like a golden thunderbolt, its talons closing around Ganymede's shoulders with strength that could have crushed stone, but which touched the beautiful youth with surprising gentleness. The flight to Olympus was both terrifying and magnificent, carrying Ganymede away from everything he had ever known toward a destination he could not imagine and a fate he had never chosen. Below him, his sheep scattered in confusion, his fellow shepherds cried out in alarm, and his father's kingdom fell away into the distance, until it became just another patch of color in the vast tapestry of the mortal world. But if Ganymede expected to be devoured or destroyed by his divine captor, he discovered instead that Zeus had very different plans for his extraordinary prize. The youth was installed in Olympus not as a victim or a slave, but as something unprecedented in the history of divine mortal relations, a permanent resident of the immortal realm, granted eternal youth and life to serve as cupbearer to the gods themselves. The position came with honors that would have been the envy of every mortal king, robes woven from starlight itself, quarters in the divine palace that surpassed any earthly luxury, and the daily companionship of beings whose power and wisdom transcended human understanding. He was given immortality, eternal youth, and a role in the cosmic hierarchy that placed him among the most privileged beings in existence. Yet all these honors could not disguise the fundamental reality of Ganymede's situation. He was a prisoner. However gilded his cage might be, trapped in a role he had never sought, in a world he had never chosen to enter. His beauty, which had once been simply a gift to be enjoyed naturally, became the chains that bound him to eternal service, ensuring that he could never return to the mortal world. He had lost, never resumed the simple life that had been stolen from him in a moment of divine desire. The irony of his position was profound. As cupbearer to the gods, he was responsible for providing the nectar and ambrosia that sustained immortal life, for ensuring that the divine beings who had stolen his freedom continued to enjoy the eternal existence they had granted him as compensation for that theft. Every cup he filled, every goblet he offered, was a reminder of his dual nature as both honored guest and eternal captive. Yet Ganymede performed his duties with the same gentle grace that had marked his shepherd's work, finding in service to the divine hierarchy a form of meaning that, while different from what he had originally chosen, still allowed him to express the generous nature that beauty had never corrupted. He became not just a servant, but a civilizing influence in Olympus itself. His mortal-born compassion serving as a reminder to the gods of virtues that immortal power sometimes forgot. Zeus, perhaps recognizing both the magnitude of what he had taken and the nobility with which Ganymede had adapted to his transformed circumstances, eventually honored his cupbearer by placing him among the stars as the constellation Aquarius. This stellar immortality was both reward and acknowledgement, recognition of the grace with which the youth had accepted an impossible situation and transformed enforced service into genuine contribution to cosmic order. But the constellation also serves as an eternal reminder of the price that extraordinary beauty sometimes pays, and of the complex moral mathematics that govern divine mortal relations. Ganymede's stellar form pours out celestial water, not as a symbol of chosen generosity, but as a monument to service that began in abduction and evolved into something approaching willing participation through the mysterious alchemy of time and adaptation. When we look up at the stars of Aquarius scattered across the winter sky, we are not seeing merely a symbol of humanitarian service or innovative thinking. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to beauty, stolen and transformed, to captivity that became calling to the complex ways in which divine favor can manifest as both blessing and curse simultaneously. The Water-bearer's constellation teaches us that sometimes the most meaningful service comes not from positions we choose, but from circumstances we learn to embrace. That adaptation can transform even the most unwilling beginnings into something approaching fulfillment, and that immortality among the stars can preserve both the glory and the tragedy of mortal experience, ensuring that neither the beauty nor the cost of that beauty is ever forgotten. As Aquarius continues its stellar journey across the night sky, its eternal urn pouring out streams of celestial water that nourish the cosmic garden, its story flows naturally toward the final constellation in our zodiacal wheel, tale that will complete the circle with its own story of divine flight and transformation, of beauty pursued by terror, and of the complex relationship between protection and panic that defines so much of mortal existence in a universe ruled by powers too vast and unpredictable for human understanding. Pisces, the fish of panic and escape. As the water-bearer reaches his stellar zenith and continues his eternal task of pouring celestial streams across the night sky, his story of transformed captivity flowing into willing service. The final constellation in our zodiacal journey begins to emerge in the eastern heavens with a form that seems almost to mirror the complexity of the cosmic cycle itself. The constellation Pisces rises like a double reflection in celestial waters, its stellar pattern depicting two fish swimming in opposite directions, yet bound together by an eternal cord of starlight, creating an image that speaks not of simple unity or straightforward purpose, but of duality born from shared terror of bonds, forged in the crucible of desperate flight from forces too terrible to face. This final sign of the zodiac carries within its stellar form the promise of completion and return, the sense that all stories must eventually circle back to their beginnings, that every ending contains within it the seeds of a new beginning. Modern astrology has embraced these celestial fish as symbols of intuition, compassion, and spiritual transcendence, the dreamers who swim in the depths of emotion and imagination, the empaths who feel the pain of others as their own, the mystics who dissolve the boundaries between self and universe in their quest for ultimate understanding. But the true story of these stellar fish speaks not of chosen transcendence or willing dissolution of boundaries, but of the most primal response to overwhelming terror, the desperate flight that transforms divine beings into creatures so far removed from their original nature that they become unrecognizable even to themselves. Their tale completes our cosmic circle by returning us to themes we have encountered throughout our journey. Divine beings forced to abandon their essential forms, beauty, transformed by fear, and the curious mathematics of survival that sometimes preserves life only by destroying identity. The story begins with Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, the divine embodiment of attraction, desire, and all the creative forces that draw beings together in harmony and passion. Born from sea foam and divine essence, she was beauty itself made manifest, her presence capable of inspiring love in the coldest hearts, peace between the most bitter enemies, and harmony between the most disparate elements. Her son Eros accompanied her always, his arrows capable of kindling desire in mortal and immortal hearts alike, his childlike appearance concealing power that could reshape the cosmos through the simple act of making any being fall hopelessly in love with any other. Together, mother and son represented the creative principle of the universe, the force that overcame entropy and separation, that transformed chaos into beauty and brought meaning to existence through the simple fact of connection. They were joy incarnate, celebration given divine form, the eternal reminder that life's deepest purpose lay not in conquest or domination, but in the sweet surrender to forces larger than individual will. But even these embodiments of love and harmony were not immune to the terror that could transform gods into fleeing animals, and their transformation came through encounter with the same monstrous force that had driven Pan to his desperate metamorphosis, Typhon, the creature of absolute chaos, whose very existence threatened to reduce the ordered cosmos to primordial storm and fury. When the monster emerged from the depths of the earth and began his assault on divine order, Aphrodite and Eros found themselves facing something that their natures could not comprehend or combat. Love has no weapon against pure destruction. Beauty offers no protection against chaos that recognizes no aesthetic principles, and harmony becomes meaningless when confronted with forces that exist specifically to shatter all connections and reduce everything to isolated fragments of fear and pain. The flight toward Egypt began, as it had for all the gods, not as organized retreat or strategic withdrawal, but as blind panic, the complete abandonment of dignity and purpose in favor of whatever form might offer the slimmest hope of survival. But Aphrodite and Eros, being more essentially vulnerable than gods of war or wisdom, found their terror more complete, their transformation more desperate and chaotic than even their fellow Olympians. As they reached the banks of the river Euphrates, their divine forms already beginning to blur and shift under the pressure of approaching doom, they realized that simple transformation might not be sufficient to ensure their escape. Typhon's power was too vast, his awareness too complete, his determination to destroy divine order too absolute to be fooled by individual disguises or conventional hiding places. In their desperation, they chose not just transformation, but complete submission to an alien element. They plunged into the sacred waters and became fish, creatures so far removed from their original natures that they could no longer be recognized as the gods they had been. Aphrodite, mistress of terrestrial beauty and divine love, became a creature of the depths, her radiance dimmed by water and mud, her divine authority dissolved in the medium that now sustained her transformed life. But their terror was so complete, their flight so frantic, that even this dramatic transformation was not enough to give them confidence in their escape. Fearing that they might become separated in the underwater realm they had chosen for refuge, fearing that they might lose each other in the dark depths and die alone in forms their original natures could never have imagined, they bound themselves together with a cord that would ensure they could never be parted, no matter how far their panic might drive them. This cord, woven from divine essence and mortal terror, became both their salvation and their eternal monument, ensuring that their flight would be remembered not as individual acts of cowardice, but as a shared journey into transformation so complete that it approached a form of death and rebirth. They swam through the sacred waters as creatures they had never been, sustained by a connection that transcended the forms they had taken, united in their exile from the divine natures that fear had made too dangerous to maintain. The two fish swam in opposite directions, as if even in their unity they could not entirely overcome the disorientation that their transformation had created. But the cord that bound them ensured that their divergent movements created not separation, but a dynamic tension that kept them eternally connected, while allowing each to explore different responses to their shared predicament. When the threat of Typhon finally passed, and the gods were able to resume their true forms and return to Olympus, Aphrodite and Eros discovered something that would change their understanding of themselves forever. Their fish forms had not been mere disguises to be discarded. Once safety returned, but transformations so profound that they had become part of their essential identities. They retained memory of swimming through dark waters, of breathing through gills, of existing in a realm where divine authority meant nothing and survival depended entirely on adaptation to alien circumstances. This experience of complete vulnerability, of existence stripped of all divine privilege and protection, gave new depth to their understanding of love and beauty. They had learned that even the most fundamental forces of attraction and harmony were fragile, that they could be threatened by chaos, that their preservation sometimes required them to become something unrecognizable to themselves and others. Zeus, recognizing the profound nature of their transformation and the courage it had taken to maintain their connection even in the most terrifying circumstances, honored their journey by placing them among the stars as the constellation Pisces. Their stellar forms would serve as an eternal reminder that love sometimes manifests not as joyful union, but as shared flight from forces too terrible to face alone. That beauty can be preserved only by abandoning its familiar expressions, and that the strongest bonds are sometimes forged not in happiness, but in mutual terror transformed into mutual support. The constellation Pisces thus completes our zodiacal circle with a tale that encompasses all the themes we have encountered. Divine beings forced into exile, beauty transformed by fear, survival achieved through transformation so complete that it challenges the very concept of stable identity. The two fish swimming in opposite directions, yet bound together, create a perfect symbol for the complex relationship between unity and duality, connection and independence that characterizes not just romantic love, but all the fundamental relationships that give structure and meaning to existence. When we look up at the faint stars of Pisces scattered across the spring sky, we are not seeing merely symbols of intuition or spiritual transcendence. We are witnessing the cosmic memorial to love, tested by ultimate terror, and emerging transformed but unbroken. The Fishes constellation teaches us that the deepest connections are not always forged in joy, but sometimes in shared struggle against forces that threaten to destroy everything we hold dear. Their stars shine with the gentle light of survivors who have learned that strength comes not from invulnerability, but from the willingness to be transformed by circumstances beyond our control, that love proves its reality, not through constant happiness, but through persistence in the face of forces that would tear apart all connections. They remind us that sometimes the most profound unity is achieved not by moving in the same direction, but by maintaining connection while exploring different responses to shared challenges. As the celestial fish complete their eternal dance across the night sky, forever swimming apart, yet forever bound together, their story brings us full circle to where our journey began under the stars, contemplating the complex relationship between light and darkness, beauty and terror, divine will and mortal experience that defines existence in a cosmos where even gods must sometimes flee, even immortals must sometimes die, and even the most beautiful stories spring from sources darker and more complex than we might initially imagine. Closing reflections. The beautiful lies of the zodiac, as the final constellation in our celestial journey completes its ancient dance across the star-scattered dome of night, the two fish of Pisces, swimming their eternal paths in opposite directions, while remaining forever bound by cords of starlight and shared memory. We find ourselves returned to where we began, lying beneath the infinite darkness, contemplating the beautiful and terrible stories written in fire across the cosmic void. But now, having traveled through all 12 houses of the zodiac, having witnessed the true origins of these familiar symbols, we see the night sky with different eyes, understand these stellar patterns with hearts that have been both wounded and healed by the knowledge of what lies behind the gentle lies we tell ourselves about the stars. The constellations wheel overhead in their eternal procession, each one carrying within its stellar form the memory of violence transformed into beauty, terror crystallized into guidance, divine caprice translated into cosmic order. They are not the simple personality guides we encounter in modern horoscopes, not the gentle symbols of human traits and tendencies that fill newspaper columns and dating apps. Instead, they are monuments to some of the most disturbing episodes in the history of divine mortal relations, cosmic memorials to abduction and sacrifice, to transformation forced by terror, to survival purchased at prices too terrible to contemplate without shuddering. Yet somehow, in the mysterious alchemy of time and human need, these dark origins have been transformed into sources of comfort and guidance. The ram born from desperate flight from sacrifice has become a symbol of leadership and pioneering spirit. The bull shaped by divine deception has evolved into an emblem of earthly strength and sensual pleasure. The twins torn between mortality and immortality have been reimagined as symbols of communication and versatility. Each constellation carries within its current meaning both the original trauma and the healing transformation that human imagination has worked upon that trauma over centuries of stargazing and storytelling. This transformation speaks to something profound about human nature, or extraordinary ability to find meaning and beauty, even in the darkest materials, to create guidance from chaos, to transform the wounds inflicted by an indifferent or hostile universe into sources of wisdom and strength. The zodiac, as we know it today, represents not just the original myths, but also the collective human effort to make sense of those myths, to extract from them whatever nourishment might sustain us through our own encounters with forces beyond our understanding or control. The ancient stargazers who first traced these patterns in the night sky understood something we have largely forgotten in our age of artificial illumination and scientific materialism. They knew that the universe is not fundamentally safe or comfortable, that divine forces are not necessarily benevolent, that survival often requires adaptation so complete that it approaches a form of death and resurrection. Yet they also knew that beauty can emerge from the most unlikely sources, that even the cruelest stories can become constellations, if we have the courage to keep looking up. Each zodiac sign, when seen in its original context, becomes a lesson in the complex relationship between power and vulnerability, between divine will and mortal resilience, between the forces that would destroy us and our capacity to transform destruction itself into sources of meaning and guidance. The ram teaches us that sometimes salvation comes at prices we never expected to pay. The bull shows us that beauty can disguise the most predatory intentions. The twins remind us that love sometimes requires impossible choices between different forms of loss. Cancer reveals that loyalty can be its own form of doom, while Leo demonstrates that even perfect invulnerability has limits that cunning can exploit. Virgo embodies the tragedy of innocence, too pure for a corrupted world, while Libra represents the cold mathematics of cosmic justice that weighs our actions with perfect accuracy. Scorpio teaches us that vengeance, however justified, transforms both pursuer and pursued, while Sagittarius shows us wisdom earned through suffering and sacrifice freely given. Capricorn reminds us that survival sometimes requires transformations we never chose, while Aquarius demonstrates that even captivity can be transformed into meaningful service through the mysterious workings of time and adaptation. Finally, Pisces completes the circle by showing us that the deepest connections are sometimes forged, not in joy, but in shared flight from forces too terrible to face alone. Together, these 12 constellations create a curriculum in the fundamental realities of existence, that beauty and terror are often indistinguishable, that divine attention is not always a blessing, that survival requires constant adaptation and sometimes demands complete transformation of our essential nature. Yet they also teach us that even the darkest experiences can be crystallized into sources of light, that even the most traumatic origins can give birth to guidance that helps others navigate their own encounters with cosmic forces beyond their control. The zodiac thus becomes not just a collection of star patterns or a system of personality classification, but a map of the human condition itself, showing us the territories we must all traverse, the challenges we must all face, the transformations we must all undergo if we hope to survive our journey through a universe that operates according to principles we can observe but never fully understand. Each sign represents both a wound and its healing, both a form of cosmic trauma and the human capacity to transform that trauma into wisdom. As you lie here beneath these ancient lights, feeling the cool night air against your skin and the vast darkness stretching infinitely above you, remember that you are part of this eternal story, that your own struggles and transformations are written in the same cosmic language that created these stellar patterns. The stars that guided our ancestors through their dark nights continue to shine down upon you. carrying within their light not just the memory of ancient myths, but the promise that even your darkest experiences can be transformed into sources of guidance and beauty. The zodiac remains both beautiful and haunting, both comforting and challenging, both a source of gentle guidance and a reminder of the terrible forces that shape all existence. Its stars continue to wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, preserving in celestial amber the complex truth that meaning and beauty can emerge from any circumstances. No matter how dark, if we have the courage to keep looking up, to keep searching for patterns in the chaos, to keep believing that even the most broken stories can become constellations, if we learn to see them with eyes trained by both love and loss. The night sky spreads above you like an infinite book written in a language older than human speech, its pages filled with stories that are simultaneously the most disturbing and the most beautiful ever told. These are your stories, written in starlight across the cosmic dome, reminding you that you are part of something larger than individual existence. Something more complex than simple personality traits, something more meaningful than the comfortable lies we sometimes tell ourselves to make the darkness less frightening. The stars are waiting, as they have always waited, to tell you their real stories, the ones that acknowledge both the beauty and the terror of existence, the ones that honor both the light and the shadow that define the human experience, the ones that remind you that even in the darkest night, even in the most impossible circumstances, there is always the possibility that your story too might become a constellation, might join the eternal dance of light across the infinite darkness, might add your own voice to the cosmic chorus that has been singing since the first human being looked up at the night sky and dared to dream that chaos might contain hidden patterns of meaning and beauty. Close your eyes now and let the ancient starlight wash over you, carrying with it all the stories you have heard tonight, all the wisdom encoded in stellar fire, all the promise that your own journey through darkness and light, through fear and transformation, through the beautiful and terrible experiences that define mortal existence, is part of the same cosmic story that gave birth to the zodiac itself. Sleep now beneath the watchful eyes of creatures born from divine terror and mortal resilience, knowing that their light will continue to shine long after your own story has been completed, carrying forward the eternal message that even the darkest beginnings can give birth to the most beautiful endings, that even the most broken myths can become guides for those who have the courage to look up at the stars and ask them to reveal their deepest, most transformative truths. The stars are singing you to sleep with their ancient lullaby of light and shadow, beauty and terror, divine caprice and human resilience, the same song they have sung since the first night, the same melody they will continue to sing until the last star fades from the cosmic dome. Rest now and let their stories become part of your dreams, part of your understanding, part of your own eternal dance between darkness and light.